So today's presentations include reflections on personal experience of migration, questions of impacts of integration policy regimes on the urban society in Norway, that is the first presentation, and analysis of conditions of resettled refugees in Estonia in terms of their perceived level of social and cultural security. And this day of the conference is organized in cooperation with Nordplus project titled From Past to Present, Migration and Integration Through Life Stories Network. The project is coordinated by Latvian Oral History Researchers Association Life Story, and that is affiliated with the University of Latvia. And project partners include the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology and the Center of Migration and Diaspora Research also of the University of Latvia, the Norwegian Institute for Urban and Regional Research of Oslo Metropolitan University, Stockholm University, and the Estonian Literary Museum. And in fact, I think almost all our team for the project was present at the conference, but we did not highlight these presentations specifically, but there were lots of the conference presentations were also these Nordplus research team presentations. Yeah. And the current project is based on long-term cooperation of several of the partners within the framework of earlier Nordplus networking projects, including, for example, the project Family History, facilitating intergenerational and intercultural exchange that was coordinated by the Estonian Literary Museum, and Education Through Oral History Network that was also coordinated also by Latvian Oral History Researchers Association. But the current project From Past to Present, Migration and Integration Through Life Stories Network focuses on processes of migration from the Baltic states to Nordic countries and Western Europe, and also problems connected with migration flows in the receiving countries. The project employs a comparative approach that focuses on similarities and differences in immigration patterns from the Baltic states, with a particular focus on aspects concerning labor markets and social security sphere. And the project has two main objectives. The first one would be utilization and supplementation of the resources of oral history and life story archives, and informing and educating the societies of the participating countries about questions of migration. And our activities include fieldwork in communities, courses, seminars, and debates with biographical research partners. And the project seeks to develop an educational project about migration and the cultural identity of migrants and the impact on people of their social surroundings. And the aim will be met by compiling approaches and methods from Baltic Nordic research experiences. And the outcome of the collaborative activities will be the formation of a special series of lectures presenting the experiences of Baltic and Nordic scholars and experts, and also setting up a web resource. Okay. So I won't take any more of your time. Let's get on with the day. And I would now like Triinu to introduce our first speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a great pleasure to share this last session of our conference. Three excellent experts will share their knowledge and experiences on different aspects of immigration via their presentations, and then a common discussion follows. Let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Susanne Soholt. Susanne is a researcher at the Norwegian Institute of Urban and Regional Research of the Oslo Metropolitan University, and her background is in political science. Susanne is dealing with various immigrant categories, and in the last few years, she has mainly focused on integration and segregation problems in the housing and labor market. But she is also interested in how migration can influence the society in general. And today, Susanne will speak about the changing character of immigration and integration regimes and its impact on urban society. So thank you, Susanne.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. So good morning, everybody. I hope you had a nice evening last night. So as somebody said, you are the survivors of the conference. During these days, we have heard a lot about immigrants' experiences, reflections, etc., about what it's like to be an immigrant, to leave a country, from the sending country perspective. My perspective is on the other side, on the receiving country, and what has happened there. So it's about how my country, Norway, has responded to immigration and integration questions, and how it has impacted on my city, Oslo. So what I'm going to talk about, my interest is in the middle, about urban life. How has Oslo changed during my lifetime from being a Norwegian city to being a diverse and multi-ethnic city? But this is, a combination of the actual immigration, about what kind of policies are developed on national and local level. It's a question about the existing population, how they have responded to the immigration, and it's also a question in the last years about the urban policy, how the city as such has responded. But first, a few words, some facts about immigration. As you can see, it has increased a lot. In the 1970s, it was about 1.5% of the population had immigrant background. Today, it's about 17% in the country, and a third of the population in Oslo has immigrant background. And as you see on the colors, the orange one on the top, that is labor migration from EU after, or especially increasing after 2004. The blue are people from Asia, labor immigrants from the 60s and 70s, and family migrants and refugees. And the dark red are people from Africa, mostly refugees and family. The largest groups today, Poles, people from Lithuania, and then you have refugees from Somalia and Syria, and our neighbors, Sweden. If you go to Oslo, in Oslo we have more people with more than 200 different backgrounds. And I've taken out the Baltic countries and then the biggest ones at the bottom. And you see that the numbers for the Baltics and the Poles are not that big in Oslo, which means that they are going to the whole country, because there are job opportunities all over the country. While the Pakistanis and the Somalis, they mostly stay in the Oslo area, or not anymore the Somalis, that's not right, they are staying also all over. But what is important is that the groups, the Pakistanis started to come in the 1960s, and if you look at the number in Oslo, about 22,000, about half of them are children born in Norway. Among the Somalis, the story is becoming something of the same, not on the same level yet, but it's increasing. But with the countries from the Baltic and the Poles, we still don't know if they will settle or if they will go back. But what we see is that, for example, the Poles, they have really increased their share of home ownership. They are buying their homes in Norway, they're buying houses, which we think is an expression that they want to stay. And they especially do that when they bring their family. But who is coming, staying and leaving? It depends also on the policies. And the international and national immigration policies, that's a way to regulate who is welcome, who is not. It's a way to sort and select. And today the most important international regulations is the UN Refugee Convention, and it's the European Economic Agreement that Norway have with the EU, which allows you to come to Norway, free labor market. And then we have the national policies, which has changed over time, but today the tendency is to try to restrict. We have these international regulations, but is it possible to restrict? The first restriction was in 1975, after the, we had the guest workers from Pakistan and other countries. So in 1975, it was a temporary stop because the social conditions, and especially housing, was too bad. It disappeared. Yeah, there it is. And later we had other restrictions. And then we have the integration policies, which have been quite inclusive and still is, but there are new, demands on if you want to have a citizenship. In former times, it was only a question about time. Now it's also a question about language and knowledge of society. If you look at the politics over time, immigration and integration, politics of openness or closure, I would say that immigration policy is becoming more restrictive, while the integration policy for those who have a legal stay in Norway, it's quite inclusive. And there are expectations that you become an active participant of society. So up there, it's a free labor migration, it's quite open. But then we are restricting people from outside the EU, and we are restricting family migration by making it harder. When it comes up there to inclusion, all people with legal rights have the same social and economic rights as Norwegians, which means that you don't need to be a citizen to have these rights. You just need the legal stay. When it comes to refugees, we have a quite active policy, targeted policy which is obligatory for the refugees to learn the language, to learn about society, etc. For labor immigrants, there are no such programs. The condition is that they stay in Norway. If they stay in Norway, they have a job, they can take care of themselves. They are also expected to learn Norwegian. They have a right to go to Norwegian courses, but they have to pay. If they don't get the courses if they work in a big working place, they might have courses in the working place. If not, it's their responsibility. So, of course, if you think you're going back, you don't bother. And then there are also some restrictions on integration, which is that there are more demands on citizenship. And there are more demands, the family migration is in a way in between integration and immigration, because it's important for the people to have their family, but it's more difficult to get them. So over the time, and this is from the 60s and 70s until today, there have been shifts in the policies. In the beginning, we didn't really have a policy. It was a new experience we had to develop. And what I think is important is that all the different kinds of people there, guest workers, labor migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, etc., when they have a legal stay, they are expected to become citizens. And that means active people in society. There's also been an important shift from focusing on the rights you have to include focusing on the duties. You have an individual duty to learn how the society works, to take part in society. You can't just sit down and wait. Another important change with the increasing diversity is a change, we have all the time we have the discussion, what is Norwegian culture? We are losing, I remember in the 70s, people said, we are losing our Norwegian culture, and we ask, what is it? Difficult to answer. Today, it's a lot of talk about that we have to increase the togetherness. And what should be the core of this togetherness? Something that binds us together in all this diversity. So that is an ongoing discussion, because there is, if we want to have this diverse society, we need something that binds us together, since in our society, it's important that people participate. And that is especially because of this on the bottom here, that we have a quite generous welfare state. And with increasing immigration, it's important that all people take part in this on both sides. And the core, as in Norway, as in many other countries, is that you should participate in society according to your capabilities, and you should get according to your need. But then everybody has to contribute. What is important also, you see on the bottom here, I think that is interesting for you since you're talking so much about belonging and etc. So in Norway, civil society has always been regarded as important. So there has been a system where the state supports cultural and religious organizations, regardless of immigration, according to members. So this has continued with immigration, which of course has means that we have very many immigrant organizations. But over the time, there has been a focus on that, yes, we support this organization, but the important thing is to now we put a lot more weight on supporting the individuals and reducing negative social control in the ethnic and religious communities, which means that if you are a Muslim, a young girl, it's up to you to decide who you are going to marry, what kind of life you want to live, etc., etc. So it's a lot of debate about that. Over the years, I think the dominant trend has been double integration into Norwegian society at the same time as you can maintain your own culture and religion. And we have all these, concepts that comes and goes, but I think the core is that people should integrate in a functional way, meaning that if they can, they should take part in the labor market. And then, of course, society has to do different things to make this possible. And if you shall function in the labor market, it's easier if you know the language. It's easier if you know the cultural codes, if you know the culture, the Norwegian culture, working life culture, the relations between employer and employees, etc. So there are expectations that in a way you try to get to know what this is about. Multiculturalism as supporting communities is really not on the agenda in Norway. It's about supporting individuals. But with all these policies and with people coming, people don't know all these different laws and regulations, so they navigate their lives according to what they know and what their friends know, their experiences, etc. And that also goes for the existing population. But how they do this and how people interrelate, of course, that influence urban life. And this is just to say a few words about, urban life and multicultural society is about people who are coming and people who are staying, the Norwegians. So this is from a study in 3 rural municipalities in Norway and the city district in Oslo, where we ask immigrants in the survey about their belonging. This is very short. But the main belonging was to Norway, then to the city or the place, the neighborhood, and the municipality at the bottom. But the exception was the labor immigrants from the EU. For them, the home country was on the top. So for you who want people to go back, that's a good news, I think. If you look at the Norwegians, or the population, the residential population, we see that over time, they become more positive to the economic and cultural role of the immigrants and immigration. And that's even now in times with increasing immigration, and also in 2015 when we had this refugee crisis. Oslo has changed because of this first immigration and the Muslims. So in the beginning, they had their mosques in the cellars of the old buildings. And then after quite many years, they got the opportunity to build new mosque. This is the first one. They had grocery stores, restaurants, etc., etc. So it's very visible in the city. And they have many mosques in this area and new built ones. And what I think is interesting is that, like this one, the architecture is influenced by Norwegian and Western architecture. It's quite modern. It's not as nice as the other one, I think, but it's, it has adapted to where it is. Over there on the other side, it's a chandelier, which is hanging inside here. And this is made by the most famous glass factory in Oslo, so it also shows how they are adapting to where they live. The small picture down there, that's the other way around. That's one of the biggest developers in Oslo. He wanted to tear down all these old houses and build new big houses and shopping mall. He wasn't allowed, so then he built a shopping center designed as a bazaar to keep the ambience in the area. So these influences are going both ways. If you look at the new immigration of the labor immigrants, in the way it's the same story. They had to take the jobs they got and stay where they could, and they had very different conditions. Those who work in the shipyards, like over there on contracts, often stay in barracks. They can be of good or bad condition. People working in the building constructions, they have very different conditions. Some stay like this, very bad. Others have their own houses, etc. So they are, they are having, some are making careers and some are having difficult times. But what I think is interesting, this group is quite big, but they are almost invisible in Oslo. But what they are doing, they are filling the Catholic churches. So there are many, many services in the church. They are queuing on the street to go to the church. They have their cultural organizations, but they are not visible for the Norwegian majority. But they are using the city in their way, but in a way it's almost invisible. There is only one Polish restaurant in Oslo and none from the Baltic countries. But this is interesting. This is just now an advertisement on the tram in Oslo towards the Poles about how to call cheap to Poland. So this is an expression that this is a big group. There's money to earn on this group. And if you go to the city, immigrants are really keeping the city running. They have all different kinds of positions, mostly at the bottom of the hierarchy and on the middle, but also on the top. It's a change. The red car, that is an expression of the people coming from here, that many of them are establishing their own small companies. They are carpenter or plumber or whatever, and we see the cars in the street, and they come into our homes to repair our homes. But they are not in the public. The picture over there, I think, is quite interesting. That is a traditional restaurant run by a Pakistani. When you think about Norway, I suppose you think about fish, that we are a fishing country, and we should have restaurants with fish, traditional fish. And you get fish in the restaurants, but in very modern ways. So there are very few traditional, ordinary restaurants where you get fish as my mother made it. So I just realized that there are some traditional restaurants in Oslo, where ordinary people go, where it's not expensive, where run by Pakistanis serving traditional Norwegian food. So they are keeping our food tradition. The city includes and the city excludes. The city has been working to make squares and marketplaces including, so that people can communicate. This is a celebration of the Somali National Day in the city center, but it also excludes those who are not part of the welfare state in a way. The city produce urban losers, so these people over there are really having a bad time. They don't get very much from the public. They tried to sleep under the highway, under a bridge, but they were taken away, and now it's a city mission who have some accommodation for these people. And the city excludes also in other ways, like we have heard a lot on this conference about young people. It can be difficult to know, how to be included? Am I Norwegian or something else? Am I accepted? So we have in some of the ethnic neighborhoods, there are gangs, criminal gangs. It goes up and down. And last year it was up in one of these areas. The police came, they were taken to prison, etc. But at the same time, the neighborhood mobilized and said that we want this area to be safe. We don't want our kids to be recruited to these gangs. And they said to the politicians, you have to do something to make this a better area for kids and young people. And they also said, what can we do to get our young people back again? Because they are our kids. This, I think, is the most important picture. Almost ready. This is the most important picture. I think this is the young generation who are, except for the professor in the middle there, they are all born in Norway, or they came as small kids. And I think what they have achieved is in a way an outcome of how all these different policies work and how they perceive their possibilities in Norway. And if I look at their parents, there were a handful maybe that raised their voice in the public, and I knew all the names. Today, there are a lot more than these people. I don't know all the names, and they are raising their voice in the public about all kinds of things. And they are really influencing it's especially in Oslo, they're really influencing society. So if you start here up on the top, he wrote a novel last year about what it's like to grow up in a multi-ethnic neighborhood in Oslo, what it's like to be a young man in this area. The book was very popular. It sold in several hundred thousands. One of his Norwegian neighbors bought the book and gave it to all the politicians in parliament because she thought it is so important that the politicians who don't live in these areas know what this is about. These guys here, also from an immigrant area. Two of them are from South America, and the one in the middle is Norwegian. They are rappers. They made the show last year. They were invited to show this in one of the biggest theaters in Oslo. It was supposed to be on stage for 3 days. That was in spring, and they are still on stage. So these, people are really interested in these questions. You see the woman up there, she's the youngest vice mayor we ever had. She's a child of refugees from Sri Lanka. The women down here, they are really fighting. They're coming from different, they have different ethnic backgrounds, fighting negative social control in the ethnic communities and the religious communities. The first one is a stand-up comedian. The second one is a writer and a public debater and really challenges the Somali community. The third one is a filmmaker, and she's going to make a film of his book. And the others, I don't know, they are even younger generation. The first one, the stand-up comedian, she is doing surprising things. Shocking Norwegians and shocking immigrants. So on a TV show, those of you who are from Sweden, you know Skavlan. It's a program every Friday night, a talk show. And he invites guests, and he had invited this woman. He also invited an imam, a mullah in Norway who is accused for being a terrorist, and he is mostly in prison, but sometimes is outside. He was also there. He's a small man. And this woman, she's quite a big woman. And they were talking in this show, and then all of a sudden, she stands up, she goes to this mullah, and she lifts him up. And he was shocked, everybody was shocked. And in a way it shows that you don't have any power. So that is nice. The third one is she's just 20 years, she's writing poetry, also very active in the public debate. And you see the next one, she is vice president in the Social Democratic Party. The doctor, many people think he's quite conservative, but I think he's really important as a bridge builder between the Muslim community and the Norwegian society. And then you have the professor. She is a Polish refugee to Norway. She is not the spokesman for the Poles. She is quite controversial, but she's really active in the public debate on all kinds of questions. So this is really a hope for the future. And we just got some information from schools in Oslo. Now I take the next one first. I think this has been important for these young people, that we have free school, including university. So they could all have a career at university for free. And then I also think it's important, I suppose it's the same in Sweden, that in school and in public and everywhere, the narrative is always that you have equal opportunities as individuals. And I think this narrative has given these young people enough self-confidence to participate in society in their own way and to the benefit of all. And I just saw from a Norwegian newspaper that the school in one of the most ethnic dense neighborhoods in Oslo, they had the best results on national tests for Oslo. Oslo is on the top in Norway, but this school was on the top in Oslo, and it's 80–90% of the children have immigrant background. So it's really a change. If you look at the city, what has happened to the city? I think the city as an actor has changed from just implementing national policy for integration to ask, what kind of city do we want? What is important for us? And many years ago, the city made a value document called Oslo Extra Large. It doesn't say anything about what to do, but it says a lot about values that should be prevalent in the municipality. And also because of the high share of immigrants in Oslo, and because it's in Oslo you have all these challenges, the city has become a lab for local and national integration policy. But still there are problems, and these problems you will have in most Western societies. But if you look, for example, to Stockholm and Oslo, the content of these will be very, very different. What is interesting today compared to years back is that years back this was a problem for immigrants. Today this is on the political agenda, so today this is a problem for the Norwegian state, for the city of Oslo, and for the majority population. So now this is on the agenda, and I think that is, in a way, it's good for the way forward. And they are doing a lot, what can we do to reduce the number of poor children, for example. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanne. for this very rich insight into the life in the multicultural Norway. We can comment Susanne's paper and ask questions after the last presentation of our session. But next, I would like to introduce Juhan Saharov. Juhan is a PhD student in the Johannes Goethe Institute of Political Studies at the University of Tartu, and he works in Johannes Michelson Center, which aims to provide opportunities for marginalized segments of the society, including refugees. In 2009 to 2018, Juhan was a project manager of the support services for refugees and asylum seekers in Estonia, and he conducted the mentorship program for the refugees from Syria and Iraq. In his presentation, Juhan will speak about the refugees who have been resettled in Estonia in 2016 to 2019.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting to this conference. I'm here as a worker from NGO, as not an academic, although I have really academic background in political science. Comparing with Norway, I think it's my presentation will give one kind of episode of migration situation and migration policies in Estonia. And as you of course know that what is difference between Norway and Estonia is that whereas Norway is a destination country for immigrants, then Estonia tends to be a transit country. And that influences migration and integration. So I would like to have a look on that. And a little bit about our organization. Johannes Michelson Center has worked with refugees now for 10 years in Estonia, and mostly what we do is we have mentorship program, so the individual mentors for families who are coming to Estonia. So my job was, I was 9 years of the coordinator of support persons or mentors for refugees, and so my job was to relate and to connect families, refugee families, with the Estonian mentors, and we trained them, supervised them, and so on. Like I said, my focus today is the one episode of immigration into Estonia. It's relocation and resettlement program. As you may heard from media and from TV, and it's the last 2 years that Estonia is the first time for Estonia to resettle people. So it's I would argue that it's kind of different from the kind of ordinary refugee policies with the spontaneous migration who are coming to Estonia through with their own, I would say, with their own will and with the motivation. So it's different. I would look to how refugees perceive by their own words Estonia. Is it their new home? How they perceive it? And then I will have a look also. What is happening is that because half of the resettled persons are leaving Estonia, have left Estonia. So what is the reasons behind that, and what is the future of this phenomenon? Do we continue as a transit country, or do what we could do to change this situation? And in the end, I will give one practical example what we have done creating as a buffer zones, which is popular term or concept here in this conference, which I really like. With what we have done, and it's not language cafe, but it's we have done it through job work integration. So, like I said, the reception of resettled and relocated refugees, it's been done now for 2 years, and we continue that. At the moment, by the way, this year has been the smallest number of refugees who have been resettled from Turkey. So what's the idea behind that? The idea, of course, is that we give the humanitarian we have a humanitarian ground for rescuing people from the camps, because also it's important to remember that these people, if European EU states doesn't resettle them, they will live with their children in the refugee camps for years, and the children grow up. The education is really it's not good in the camps, in the centers. So in a way, it's a rescue operation. It's not so much about maybe other grounds, so humanitarian and rescue operation. But still, if we look at, it's not only about rescuing. It's also how the state sees it. It's about finding also these families who have the potential, like they say, they have a potential for integration. Like you see, it was Estonian state agreed about 550 refugees that they are agreed to resettle or to relocate. And finally, it was accepted 206, which is in statistics, it's one of the lowest numbers in EU states. So if UNHCR questioned Estonian state that why the number is quite low, so the answer was that the state with the interviews in Greece and Turkey, they couldn't find enough families who are willing or who have the potential for integration in Estonia. And the question was also how you evaluate this. So the state said that there are reasons about the security, so that many of the families also, they weren't enough secure for the Estonian society. So that was at least one answer. The other thing is that, which is of course important, is that the Estonian decision to spread refugees across Estonia, not to putting them to some cities. For example, Portugal has made different decision. Portugal relocates people to Lisbon and to the neighboring counties of Lisbon. So to the quite one place. The idea is, of course, that to build a kind of more secure community, whereas Estonian political decision was to spread them around the country, also in the small and middle towns, for example, Rakvere, Põlva, Kunda, Türi, Pärnu, Haapsalu. So these are small towns, and it also influences the results, like we see. And also, in the legal aspect, they are allowed to leave Estonia, but actually only for 3 months, like all the EU residents, we are also. And then after the 3 months, they have to register themselves in these states. So 206 persons, and the last month, the statistics say that 83 of them, they are not currently in the country, so they have left. They have left Estonia, and one family of 5 from Iraq, they also returned to Iraq, and from Tallinn, not from Kunda or from Türi, but they lived in Tallinn. So my question is also today that why they are leaving, and how do they explain it? And if people from other states here don't, I think you need also the information that Estonia has given asylum less than 600 people in 20 years. So it's really, really small number comparing with Norway, for example. Or even with some Norway town are getting more refugees in a year or in a month that we have had in 20 years. And still we have these discourse in media that we have them a lot, or they are coming here a lot. And I guess some of you have seen the kind of project that Time magazine have made. Have you? Okay. Then I'm actually glad to share it with you, because I think it's really important and interesting project, and it relates with Estonia very well. So the Time magazine, they had a project. They monitored 4 families, and 4 families who they gave birth for 4 kids, and so the American journalists, they monitored their resettlement journey from the Greece to other European states. And the fourth baby is the baby who with her family, they were relocated to Estonia from the Greece. And I will have next. So you see, so it's really well done from the Time magazine. And why I chose this Time magazine example is that I think it's it's quite a typical journey of many families who came to Estonia. So what I see from this story is that I see these kind of quite typical patterns with other families. So Time magazine, they made this timeline. So it's Taima. The story is about Taima and her husband Mohanad, and their baby Helen, who was born in Greece. In Greece, and then Time magazine video journalist Francesca will monitor and will send messages to Taima, whereas when she's in Greece and going to Estonia. And so I suggest you after the conference also to have a look on this maybe more closely. So it's 2 years, and it's very well done. I think it's the original SMSs between the journalists and between the family, and so you can see this kind of perception what they have in Greece, in Estonia, and then going on. So the daughter was born in Greece. They came from Syria to Greece, and then Taima gave a birth, and then went back to the refugee camp. You see, it's only tents. It's in the hangar. These are the camps, and this is Greece and not Turkey, which have worse conditions. And then they had okay, here it's the situation in Greece. So you see, they ask, any news on where you go next? No news. I'm so bored, all we do is wait. And the journalist is in New York. So they change pictures, photos. The kid was not in the hospital, but everything went okay. And you see that the asylum office called about our asylum interview. So the interview then after that was made with Estonian state interviewers. And so they are going to Estonia. So he's saying that everyone on this bus is saying Germany is a good country, and that in France they banned the hijab, and they have these asylum office in Athens. And then he said that, how did your interview go? We got asylum in Estonia. Do you know where that is? We were hoping to get Germany. And why I am so unlucky. So what I want to say with that is that they are a month later. They are going to Estonia. We are only allowed 23 kilos per person on the plane. So in that you see like how is the situation before the flight. A 6-month-old kid. So they are leaving Greece, going to Estonia. Like they say that Greece, they are already a little bit, they have not integrated, but adapted in Greece because of this climate. And this is the brother who sent this from the village of Syria. At the same time, they changed photographs. Have you learned more about life in Estonia? I watched videos on YouTube and I really liked it. Have you been on a plane before? No. And they are going from Istanbul. I think it's from Istanbul to Tallinn. So I think this is the video that she saw. They go into Estonia, and this is what I also witnessed when I went. I personally didn't organize Taima's and Mohanat's reception. But this is the place in the airport where they have their fingerprints and all the first documents they have to do in the so these are the travel documents. So they don't get, of course, passports, but they get the travel documents. This is the travel documents, and then they can, for example, move also in European Union. And this is Põlva. So they are going to Põlva, 3 hours, and he says that the smell is horrible. Maybe you haven't smelled it. The toilets are really bad, and so on. This is what they say. A month later, this is quite typical, I would say, place housing where all these resettled persons are being accommodated in Estonia, whether it's Pärnu, Rakvere, Põlva, or some other, or also in Tartu, in Annelinn, is because there are the most empty apartments, and the Estonian state, the accommodation of apartments was through the national agency. So they, these are mostly the buildings they are living. So who made the photos? It was Time magazine photographer who was with them in Põlva, and had these who lived in Estonia, but then visited them at times. But the writer was in New York. So they're thinking to leaving to Germany. So how they perceive it, they say that, because the journalists ask what happens if you leave Estonia. They say that we lose our benefits, we lose our apartment, and we probably have to go back to a camp. And they have a small kid, but many of the families, they have, 8 years, 10 years, and so on. And for example, from Rakvere, from Tartu, there were loads of families who left. Actually, the kids were in the kindergarten or in the schools, and everything. Well, for us, the kind of many things went right exactly for kids, but not to the families, not to the parents. So they don't see. The opportunity, for example, education for the kids as some kind of priority or something which they see the refugee camp in Germany, where they don't have actually rights and they have so much less opportunities. They have this better place than some Estonian town. So the typical situation for our workers was that we didn't have a phone call, and we had some kind of maybe we had to have an appointment with the family, and then it turned out that the family has left. So this was also this picture and maybe one SMS. This was for our workers also. A quite typical situation. So they went to Western Germany, Kusel camp. So they are in so many families, like I said, more than 80 persons, mostly went to Germany, and they are still there. Only I think 3 families have returned, deported back to Estonia. So here is the situation when the Time magazine ended the project, and I will tell what happened next. So they are appealing deportation orders that would take them back to Estonia, but they have run out of money to pay legal fees. So they are in the camps, and they trying to stay in Germany, not go back to Estonia. So this is the project the Time magazine made. I think it's quite well, actually. I would say being in this process will kind of summons up the process. So some other voices, why I say that forced migration, the resettlement can be perceived as the continuation of forced migration, is that some of the voices from the resettled refugees in Estonia, like has been that it feels like an arranged marriage. So maybe someone asked why arranged, that if you are in the refugee camp, then you cannot choose, really. You cannot choose the country where you can go. It's a matter of luck. It depends on who is in the camp, who is doing the interview, and are you willing to say no or yes to go? Because if they have said no, then they couldn't go anywhere else also. So the idea is that European Union is the common common platform, that you cannot shop asylum, that you have to be get what they give. And then the same family in Põlva, they said that even paradise is no fun without people. It's a good sentence, I think. So these for example, I met with one family, and the question for me was also that when will the other refugee families come to live in our town? They were the only ones. So I think why it's important to not only talk about Estonia but also about Greece, because this is the background and the kind of initial start to the journey, and I think it really set the tone to this their perception. How do they see Estonia? How do they see it? Is it their new home or not? But you see that also Tamm said that actually I can get used to live here. I will adapt quickly. All our friends who left Greece before us told me that whatever country you get, you feel suffocated at the beginning, but you will adapt to the place slowly. And if you see the families who have stayed, for example, Türi, Pärnu, Tallinn, Rakvere, I can say that they're getting better and better. But exactly, this is the first phase. Are you going to, what you're going to do? And we'll come back to that question. So the social workers, officials, and our mentors also, what they have said, it's interesting to see that, for example, one official from the Ministry of Social Affairs says that where we fail is the managing expectations. Like you saw, the department wasn't good enough, and so on. So it can be. It's the expectations are something that we kind of have to manage. And I think it's also a good quote. One of the officials says that I feel like we are competing with a dream, and I really agree with this last sentence that. Successful integration probably won't happen until the next generation, when the children in school today grow up, learn the language, and get jobs. But in order to reach that point, the families need to stay. And what I see this as a temporary situation, actually. I think that the more families stay in Estonia, the more we can have also, and they can have the platform for the community, which are more secure for them. So the question, why resettled and relocated refugees leave but other refugees stay? So what I see is that first, they haven't chosen the country by themselves. So they don't have really motivation or this kind of solidarity or allegiance to a Estonian state that, well, you rescued us from the camp and we will stay here in the state. They don't see it in this way. The other point, the confusion and rumors spread in the between them, all the Syrians, they called each other and said that, okay, we are going to Germany, are you coming? So the others didn't want to stay behind. So it was also about this kind of communication. Relatives in other states, mostly in Germany, culture shock, and of course they feel isolated and depressed without their community. The other refugees, they lived in the reception centers, and we see that the leaving the reception center, leaving Estonia, is really really small, the percentage. Why resettled refugees is a special case? Like I said, the motivation. Then the educational background is really different from illiteracy to higher education. They compare themselves with other resettled refugees in other states. Because it's the one program, so they have many friends and many families in the same camps who are, for example, in Germany or in Lithuania or in Austria. So they call to each other, so they can compare, because they started like from the same platform. So that's different also with the spontaneous migration. And I would say also they don't have really no earlier experience of learning the foreign language, especially the low educated persons. What we can learn from the field. I've put here many things that we should with the state we should consider, and you see that actually very practical and multi-layered language learning everywhere, language cafes, but also classrooms, outside of the classrooms, in the job places. What we are doing at the moment is we are trying to create a platform with employers that refugees could study Estonian in the workplace, and not with the teacher, but with the worker, with the local worker who could in this language immersion method they could teach and learn. So what we have done recently is that our, like say, buffer zone, we have had those language cafes in Tallinn. We have 2 offices in Tartu and Tallinn. But what we did is we created so-called job readiness training. And we see that it's what the usual institutions, for example, Töötukassa, doesn't provide is this kind of more deeper psychological training for finding your strengths and identity. It's just it doesn't really work in this way that you have an employer and you have a Töötukassa, and then Töötukassa worker says that he is the number, call to the employer and go to work, because they don't, they kind of they treat them as ordinary citizens, equal opportunities, equal methods. But so because it's so new phenomenon in Estonia. So what we have done is that we had so it lasts about 4 months. The psychological training for finding your strengths and identity. In the beginning, it's not about the work and the job, yes, but your own identity and strengths. Discussing relations at workplace, cultural norms, and so on. Career counseling in the Arabic. We had an interpreter and had extensive career counseling with the translation, and then recreational events also. So this is one of the times when it's Tiina Sarvelma, who is now making his work design and happy workplace kind of approach, and here are the participants in the group. And we visited also some some schools with people and had a class there to say that this is something, this is vocational schools that you could be part of. And I found it really, all the participants, they got the job, or they got the job practice after the training. So I thought it's a really useful method to use. And this group event, not individual, but with group, which empowers, of course, the participants. So finally, the conclusions, what I see is that to think that refugees only, it's the physical security, that you can fly them from the camp to Põlva apartment. It's not enough. It's not only physical security, but they need social security, even if they have some families in the town. But, well, in the first phase, it's really hard for them if they don't have a cultural security, if they don't have this community which speaks their languages, which is, it's very typical in, especially in, for example, in Pärnu, Kunda, Türi, Rakvere. So the resettlement program is sometimes perceived as a continuation of forced migration. By the way, the family I told you, the Time magazine family, in the end they were deported back to Estonia. And now they were deported back to Põlva, but they couldn't live there anymore, and so they moved to Tallinn. So at the moment they are in Tallinn. And why they were also, they couldn't really defend themselves legally was actually also part of this Time magazine project, because they were visible. They couldn't say that they are someone else. The Time magazine kind of revealed their identity. Isolation from the community causes panic. So these are panic decisions they've made actually, and it causes also secondary movement. So we can conclude that forced migration is mixed with family migration. So these are the pull factors which you cannot just resettled persons to somewhere and not to expect that there are some pull factors from other states. There are need for non-state buffer zones, and now the Estonian state, to conclude, the Estonian state actually they have said that it doesn't work, the spreading them across the country. So the new resettlement policy for the Estonian state is they are actually, in the first place, they are going to reception center, so they are all together, and then actually they can choose in Estonia where they can go. So mostly it's Tallinn and Tartu. So they are not going to the small towns anymore. So they see, some of the people have said that it was a kind of social experiment or a social test, or like what it would tell us. So today we see that the need for the community and for these persons is for also people who are coming from the traumatic experiences. We shouldn't forget that. It's the need for these three security types. It's very, very existential, something that drives them, and we should consider it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juhan, for dealing with these problems which are really important for all of us. Now, before we move on with our third presentation, I ask you to have a cup of coffee or tea. Please be back in 20 minutes.